Hello and welcome. You're watching yet another edition of the Weekly Brief right here on News 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra, joined as always by Rakesh Kharit, News 9, and R. Sridharan, editor International TV 9 Network. And thank you so much for tuning in, gentlemen. Let's get down straight to the brass tacks. I think the biggest story undeniably in the newsroom this week was AQI, AQI, AQI. And I'm not talking just about people chanting AQI, AQI when Rekha Gupta entered that stadium. I'm actually talking about a real serious situation that all of us living in Delhi NCR and pretty much in any big city in India are dealing with right now. And this comes on the back of countries, including the US, including Europe, rolling back on their EV policies. We'll come to the EV policies in just a bit, but Rakesh, this AQI problem has gone a little too far. There seems to be absolutely no course correction, and there seems to be no way to get around cleaning our air. What is to be done?
Governance is breathing for, he's gasping for governance.
Yeah.
So these are the two words that define the unfortunate situation that we are all in. And I have repeatedly been saying that this is a complete political and policy apathy.
But I mean, party after party, government after government, you look at the Congress government, you look at the Aam Aadmi Party, you look at the BJP, you can't just keep pinning blame on the previous government, because at some point we are playing with lives. There are enough studies which are showing that, people living in Delhi NCR
there's no previous government, there's government, every government is equally responsible.
5 to 11 years or 5 to 12 years is the average, lifespan cut short by, and that's a serious problem.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I think if we were to believe that successive governments are going to do nothing about it, is there need for policy action on the corporate side? And I'm talking EVs here, because for some reason we haven't seen the kind of EV penetration that we should have seen, which should have put us on that roadmap to be 30% electrified by 2030. We are still, last count, we are still 5% EV penetration on new cars sold. As a percentage of the total cars that exist, we would be in maybe second decimal place history. But we are seeing US is pretty much retracting on that EV policy. Ford has pretty much shelved a $9 billion plan.
Right.
The European Union is unlikely to discontinue ICE engines after 2035. And like I said, India with a very low penetration, unlikely to meet the 30% target by 2030. Are our car makers also not playing ball when it comes to dealing with pollution as a real challenge?
So, talking specifically of EV and what's happening to EV sales, Karthik, if you look at what's happening globally, there is an interplay of global geopolitics and also concerns around actual, access to rare earths. And in Europe, the challenges of electricity costs going up, right? So there's a confluence of events which are coming together to put some sort of a roadblock in the growth of EV. To be sure, numbers estimate, that till 2027, there's going to be a global growth in terms of EV. 30 million EV vehicles will be sold. That's a projection. And China will continue to remain the leader with more than 60% share of the market. Coming to India, we do about 2 million right now, out of which almost 2/3 is your, two-wheelers and three-wheelers. Four-wheelers account for only about 100,000, units of EV. Now, why isn't EV a panacea for pollution? It's also because unless you have a complete vertical integration, a green integration, which goes all the way back to clean energy production,
right?
If you're going to fire up more coal-powered, powered plants to produce electricity, then charge all these EVs, you're not really gaining that much at an aggregate level.
Right.
Okay, and I'm not even talking about the amount of pollution or the carbon footprint you're creating in the entire manufacturing process.
Right.
And from a consumer perspective, Karthik, there is also concern in terms of, there's a range anxiety, as it's being called,
True.
the cost of battery ownership. So these are all coming into play, and there is some sort of rethink happening, both at the manufacturer level as well as the consumer level.
Sure. Let's pick up some of these points that you just mentioned. And interestingly, the power grid has to be green for the green revolution when it comes to the environmental dividend of electrification to come through. But on that, again, Rakesh, year after year, the data sets become more confusing, because till exactly a year back, we were squarely blaming neighboring states of Punjab and Haryana to be the biggest emitters of pollution into Delhi thanks to stubble burning. And this year, the narrative has shifted back to tailpipe emission. We are talking about vehicular pollution. We are not really talking even about thermal power plants causing emission or factory effluents causing pollution. We are really talking about vehicular pollution. So I mean, is there real science at play here? Can we pinpoint what causes the kind of AQI levels that we see? And if we can, and if vehicular pollution is whatever 37, 38% of the total pollution, then electrification of mobility should be the way forward.
Absolutely, Karthik. I think there is deficit on data, there is deficit on policy, there is deficit on corporate governance here also in terms of their contribution, and there is a global geopolitical shift. You know, when Trump says drill baby drill, you know, we are making a pivotal shift from EV to something else, going back to fossil fuel. Yeah. So in that sense, these four factors combine. I have a relatively historical context on the EV and the role cars play or vehicles play in pollution. In 2012, when we did the Commonwealth Games, we went for a CNG massive push. Right. We all celebrated as one big victory, but you know, it was a short-lived victory because we didn't back it up with sufficient number. There was no charging problem there. There was no thermal draw in terms of fossils. Yet it didn't really turn up the way it should be because every time there are new factors getting added to the challenge.
But if I can jog your memory back, Rakesh, even a decade before that, maybe if memory serves me right, maybe I'm talking about 2000, 2001, and that is when the first wave of electrification, of CNGification of mobility happened in Delhi. Because I remember, as an outsider, anytime I would come to Delhi, get off the railway station, the eyes would start smarting. Yeah. And cut to maybe 2 or 3 years later, Delhi was greener, the diesel auto rickshaws were done away with, the red line, blue line buses were done away with, and there seemed to be, if I remember correctly, this was the Sheila Dikshit Congress
2012, that's right.
Right. So,
yeah, she had a 15-year stretch.
Absolutely. So, you know, so there was a massive policy push on CNG in the early 2000s, and then the second one around 2012 or so.
That was the big one.
It's been almost 14, 15 years to that as well, and yet we are unable to come out with a decisive policy which is going to clean up the city of the messy air.
Yeah, so when you planned CNG, did you plan keeping in view the number of cars that would be added? Did we play sufficient policy role on carpooling? We haven't done. Did we brought in odd even, had a certain sense of, you know, and lastly, as Sri is saying, distribution of CNG, making it available. So if you do a profusion today, you know, the number of fossil petrol pumps versus CNG petrol pumps, the number is still alarmingly low in favor of CNG.
That's right, and hence the long queues that you see around CNG.
And also from car makers' perspective, CNG is no longer a cash incentive, you know, product. They're shifting to EV, but EV has the back-end problem because it's an assembly that makes EV succeed globally, and that hasn't happened as now. I mean, in my housing society, there are 2 EV points, but there are not enough cars now. Earlier, there were no EV points. So that challenge between number of cars, number of EV points, battery being tested as a new idea. It's a new idea, of course, but believe me, you, Karthik, and I would add to, you know, what Shree's, I endorse that. It is a absence of holistic policy framework. Someone has to spend. I was against interministerial or intergovernment ministerial, you know, something that was a virtue or a vice in the UP era. We need to go back to that EGOM, empowered group of ministers, bringing in states as equal stakeholders and then make it happen.
Okay, is there dependence on China which is also slowing us down? Because it's not just the batteries and the battery chemistry and the lithium ion, it is also the solar panels that we need eventually to make our power grids greener. Absolutely. So should the government actually look at, with these thawing of relations between India and China, should we actually open up the floodgates of our borders to bring in cheaper EVs? Cost of ownership goes down, charging infrastructure can be rapidly built, and yeah, I mean, once you have that infrastructure up and running, decide whatever future course you want to take with your neighbor.
So some of the smart OEMs, Karthik, they are looking at a hybrid solution, literally. So you have a combustion engine, which is overlaid with a EV. Right. So that stretches your mileage, and in city traffic, it's your EV which is running.
Right.
So you reduce the pollution.
Strong hybrids.
So I think that's a very smart way to go forward for a country like India, where we have challenge of adding green, capacity for power generation. I think that's a very good interim solution. I myself, I'm a believer in hybrid. I have a hybrid car, which works very well for me, because I notice that when I'm driving within the city, I'm pretty much running on just EV, and there's no smoke or anything coming out of my car.
Here again, Karthik, the problem with the government is they're receiving pitches from both, hybrid makers and the EV guys, the pure play guys. There are lobbies at work. They need to have the mix. Then there's the ethanol piece, which again has run into trouble because of the blending. So I think, you need to do forecasting. You need to see what is on the ground, the key challenges. We need a mix of all these three. We can't go only for EV. I mean, as the big picture. Neither can we only go for hybrid. Absolutely. We need to test it out the way the car density is increasing in this country. Parallelly, we need to bring in ideas like carpooling, or even, any idea at that level is not the perfect idea.
I think the best solution would be mass transport. If we just gave high quality mass
transportation. The Delhi Chief Minister is saying that, hey, we are going to introduce more buses, and I urge everybody to take those buses to, to wherever you need to commute to. But I mean, we know how densely populated our cities are, and I really wonder if our cities, our metro cities, can ever offer a smooth public mobility ecosystem which would pretty much live up to the comfort of being in your own car.
Delhi
I think it's
Metro.
possible.
There is a learning from Delhi
I'm
Metro.
sorry to say this, but again, we have to look at China on how they manage their transportation system also. I mean, they've invested so much on the rail infrastructure, whether it's within the city or between the states, connecting the provinces with high-speed, trains. I think it's possible. Karthik, what you need is a policy commitment, a policy direction, the political will
And
to push
massive
it through.
investments to get the infrastructure
Investment, I think,
going.
will come.
Delhi
as long as you
Metro is a
facilitate the
living
environment for it to
example.
come.
Delhi
Right.
Metro is a
So
living
let's-
example how it has changed the public transportation.
You're right. So, okay, I think let's keep that infrastructure, very vital infrastructure debate for another day. For now, we will slip into a very short break, but something very closely linked to these pollution months are also the months of fog. And what does fog and foggy mornings lead to? Well, flight cancellations, flight delays. We'll talk about that on the other side of the break, where we will discuss how India's citizens are paying the price for duopolies that exist in Indian skies and not just the Indian skies. That and more on the other side of the break.